Dr. Martin Luther King said it best when he said, "We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools."
We continue the conversation on 4-1 Forward with Dr. Pamela Malone. She's an expert in sociology and teaches at MATC. So thank you so much for coming here. What is your takeaway here on what's happening in the city of Milwaukee? It's no surprise we have seen study after study that says we are the most segregated city in America.
Well, I'm going to agree. I listened to the last segment, and I'm going to agree that we are still segregated. Many people feel that segregation has decreased, but segregation is not only the spatial separation of people, it's the separation of people in terms of attitudes and values and myriad other factors. So my take is we're still very segregated.
So tell me this, though, Dr. Malone, how can we individually or collectively break down what is now seems to be an unconscious practice of segregation?
I'll deal with the collective first.
Okay.
As a sociologist, we deal with group behavior. So I think, well, I have three factors that I'd like to look at. And one, I think we have to deal with education. So if I had 5 factors, my first 3 would be education, education, and education.
Okay.
But not just in terms of denying equal opportunity to blacks and other minorities, but also in terms of denying multicultural education to whites, because research shows that whites benefit just as much, if not more, from a multicultural or integrated education.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, the Urban Institute out of DC looked at the cost of segregation, and they ran some numbers for us. They said, take a look at this. If Milwaukee's black-white segregation ranking could drop by 20%, and Dr. Malone, you can see it right here, the black per capita income would go up by $1,648. Homicides, they said, would drop from 101 to 87. This is in 2010 they looked at. That's a drop of 14. They're saying there's actually a cost to being segregated, and if you change those numbers, there's a great benefit to it. Do you agree?
Well, I'm not sure that I would agree with the numbers, having been able to look at the methodology, although I did look at some of it, and it was pretty sound.
Okay.
But I would agree generally, although I'm not sure about the numbers, because I think there are other factors that enter.
Such as?
Individual factors.
Okay.
I mean, we always have to look at the individual. As a social scientist, I rarely look at the individual, but we still have to look at individual effort. We also have to look at families. How did the families motivate people to achieve? Of course, we have to look at how individuals process the racial treatment that they've experienced, because they process it differently.
Sure, but what do you tell someone who tangibly wants to know, how do I break down the barriers, the biases that I may have, or the privileges that I may have had in segregation here in Milwaukee? What can I do so that I am not a part of the problem, but more a part of the solution?
So are we speaking in terms of what I would tell a white person, or?
Whoever.
Because I would.
Yeah, okay. What would you tell Charles? What would you tell Shannon?
Well, first, there's a concept called implicit racial bias, which is highly correlated with institutional racism. Now, many studies argue that people are not aware that of institutional racism but I'm not too sure that I believe that people are always unaware that
But doesn't
it
that
exists.
change through generations? You know, the generation today versus generation of my parents versus my generation. Do you see changes over the generations, an improvement, that the barriers get broken down?
Oh, there's no doubt that there's been an improvement. But you can legislate as much as you want. But what can you do with the minds and hearts of people?
Right.
And I think that gets to the crux of the question. Have the minds and hearts. Now, you know I'm a professor, so I have hundreds of students.
Yes.
So I told them about you. And so
They're all watching, hopefully.
We went over some of these questions.
Yep.
And it does seem that this generation is more willing to talk. They're more willing to interact. But interaction amongst people who are equals is more effective than interaction amongst people who are not. For example, if a billionaire is interacting with their Latino maid and she seems like family, that interaction is not going to be the same as if it's student to student. So I really think that blacks and whites going to school together helped that.
Okay.
Okay, it helped that.
All right.
Well, we appreciate you coming in and sharing your thoughts on this important topic. Thank you very much, Dr. Malone.
And I appreciate the invitation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Racial segregation isn't just a Milwaukee County problem. It also speaks to the metro area.
Coming up on 4-1 Forward, we'll talk to a Waukesha County businessman and board member who wants people to rethink what it means to have a regional steady ready workforce.